Thank you all so very much. This is Mandy's favorite Massillon buildings, part 2. I, of course, get a little bit carried away because there's so many great options to cover. So in theory, there could be a part 3, but I'm going to cover a few buildings today that have a lot of very exciting history. And you always feel like the new kid, and I am in a room of people who intimidate me with their knowledge because they've bestowed a lot of that knowledge upon me. So I'm thankful for all of you in this room. So here we are. All right, so the Abel Fletcher Photography Studio. Can anybody tell me where that is? South Erie, yes. So today it still stands. This is one of the buildings that I will chain myself to the front door to save if I need to, but this is Abel Fletcher Studio. I'm not quite sure what year it was built exactly, but it has to have been pre-1842, 43 when Abel Fletcher came here to Massillon from Virginia. And so the backside is kind of interesting and intriguing. It's got a very kind of plain look. You know, there's a lot of buildings downtown with a lot of stylized, roofs and windows. It's kind of a very understated sort of a building. So on that very top floor there, Abel Fletcher would have had his photography studio, and in the 1840s, that's kind of the birth of photography. So they would have needed a very large skylight to let the light into the studio. And so just giving you a little before and after and see how things have changed. Again, some of those ornate pieces have kind of been added over time, little decorations to the windows to make it a little bit more modern in the time. So Abel Fletcher came here from Virginia in the 1840s with his wife and opened up his photography studio on South Erie Street. So this is the only one that I've seen of this where it's like a small, kind of a calling card sized, not quite business card size, but calling card sized, talking about his Daguerrean artistry, that you can come and get a Daguerre-type portrait. This is a self-portrait that he took of himself. It is hand-tinted. His cheeks are a little bit painted in red. And daguerreotypes were really the only type of photography that was readily available for people to have their portrait taken until everyone started to experiment and try out different methods. So Abel Fletcher actually invented the paper negative. Today we call it a calotype. At the exact same time that Fox Talbot in England also invented it. And one of them had a really good PR machine, Fox Talbot, and he gets the credit for this paper negative, and Abel Fletcher is sometimes forgotten in the history of photography. There are several paper negatives in the collection of the Massillon Museum in like a super tucked away envelope so that we don't ruin this magical moment of history by accidentally touching them. But they're very dainty, they're very meant to be able to kind of send light through them to make multiple copies of the same photograph. Daguerre-type portraits are just a one-off on a copper plate with lots of mercury and chemicals to be able to make a one-of-a-kind portrait. So this was kind of the movement towards maybe we want 2 of that same family portrait at the same time. So that is him on the left, and then this is one of his experiments there on the right. So in all of the photographs that we have in the collection, we have a lot of the glass plates from the studio, which I believe were actually the work of his wife, Mary Fletcher. But this one here on the left actually shows the skylight in the picture, which is amazing to see. There's a massive column of light that allows them to take pictures. Because the process was slow, it took a lot of light, it took a lot of time for those portraits to actually happen, which is why a lot of people aren't smiling. And why people always look grumpy and maybe sometimes are blurry. The one on the right here you can kind of see in the, sorry, I can't not move. There right here is a reflector, so to take some of that light and to reflect it back onto the portrait subject. So these little behind the scenes things that I thought were really kind of cool to share. So some of the photographs that he took were of the earliest photographs of Massillon. So this is on the left, that is the Masonic Temple, which eventually became the Salvation Army at the corner of Charles and 1st Street Southwest. This is James Duncan, original founder of Massillon. That was his mill that eventually went on to become a furniture company. And downtown Massillon. up until last year, these buildings were all still standing. So we can really kind of match up exactly where those pieces are. So most recently, Duncan's Jewelers would have been kind of off to the side here. And then this is one of the new Farmers Insurance, thank you, building. So these are all still here. And again, so sadly, we lost these two storefronts right here, but this is all still the original 1850s block of downtown Massillon. There's that before and after. So again, it's kind of nice to be able to see like originally what the building actually looked like and to see that, yes, it was still there. Sometimes they'll add that bay window into it, add some decorations, some little kind of nameplates at the top to name the building, the Conrad building or the druggist. One of the other ways he shot out of his studio, he shot down to the Christie's Dance Emporium studio. I think, was that the WTIG on the third floor? Okay, so that third floor sadly was then lost to fire, and in that third floor there were a lot of negatives and things from a different photographer as well. But you can see that at least, in the 1840s and 50s when Abel Fletcher was taking these, you can see there were no other buildings, which is interesting to note. So then when you need to date other buildings, you can go back to these photographs and actually pick out some of that information. And of course, there were portraits of Massillonians here, there, and everywhere, including a pet portrait, a pet parrot that we weren't quite sure. In the margins is written like, maybe this belonged to Pease or Folger, question mark. So we're not sure whose parrot it is, but it's a really, 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 really long ago portrait of a parrot. So some pretty great things. There were also several portraits of African Americans in the collection, some experimental photography there on the bottom left with different inks on different papers. A lot of amazing people were captured. This is looking down South Erie Street, if anybody knows the stone block. Which is right here. So this is like the original. It got added onto. There's some more modern structures, but that was the start of that. And this is one of my favorites. These are two canal warehouses, one belonging to Joseph Watson, who had a grocery and a drugstore and a wholesale. These were up until the 1920s when they kind of became too monstrous for a non-canal town to have these huge warehouses. And this one is one of my absolute favorites. We actually have two copies of this in the collection. They are both daguerreotypes. One that was outside of its encasing, and everyone and their mother, for some reason, put their fingerprints all over it, and it's completely unrecognizable. But this is the one that stayed in its case. The issue with daguerreotypes, and they're still kind of working out how to preserve or to restore daguerreotypes, including like Eastman Kodak is still working on how to bring back some of these daguerreotypes. But as the air gets in, because it's got the silver in the process of photography, you do see, a little bit of silvering right there on the outside, tarnishing. So you don't really want to go in with your tarnish scrubbing because you take layers off and you don't want to take any kind of the photographic information that's there off. But a lot of daguerreotypes will also look a little bit foggy. So some of these chemicals, having been kind of sealed in there over time, they start to grow. They kind of look like little lichen that grow. So they're still trying to figure out what the best way to deal with that is.
Well, why is that?
Where what? Oh.
Yeah,
so this is Joseph Coleman's jewelry store, which is today the Shearer's downtown world headquarters zone. So we're kind of looking at their kind of front lawn area. So this is the first house built in Massillon that belonged to Beriah Brooks in the 1830s. And this was James Duncan's, one of his homes, which is now the site of the Lincoln Theater. And of course, when you're sleuthing and trying to find the things and you zoom in on these pictures and you're picking out the windows to see if the building still exists, there's a lot of details. There's a lot of great, I don't think you can zoom in. Oh, you can't, hey. Woo! Look at the people, right? So because these daguerreotypes took so long to expose to light in order to record any information on the image, there were typically not people or horses or carriages or anything, because if you're taking a street shot, people are coming and going, no one's standing still. So I think for this one, it seems like the McClymonds and their customers stayed still specifically for this photograph. Also, their dress is kind of interesting. They look like bonnets and some little coats. It's helpful too sometimes to see, if they're very, very poofy skirts, we can guess that they're from the Civil War time period. These are not quite as poofy, so probably late 1840s, early 1850s, somewhere in there. Right? How cool is that we can look back? I really want, if anybody gets a time machine, I just want to go visit Massillon for a day. Get my smallpox vaccine first before some diphtheria, whatever else might be going around, so that I'm prepared. Maybe an Outlander, take my top secret antibiotic just in case. But I would love to just roam around and visit all these places. Yeah.
When did they tear down the Duncan home, and build the theater?
I'm not sure when they took the home down specifically. Technically, the Lincoln Theater was next to the Grand, where the Shearer's building proper is. So the Grand would have gone up in the late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s. Yeah. So the fact that we have Duncan's fourth home here as part of the library is pretty spectacular. But supposedly he ran a grocery out of part of his home, and then the family lived in the other part of the home. Yeah.
East of the current theater, there was the Massillon Club?
Yes.
Is it now torn down? Is that visible in that?
No, it would not be. First, it wouldn't have been built yet.
Been built yet, okay.
Yeah, but it would have been up this direction. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
And
Yes.
Did you say the White House was the guy that owned Coleman Jewelry?
No, so this is Joseph Coleman, who made clocks. He did the clocks for the First United Methodist Church.
I thought his building was the ultimate Moose Lodge, which is now an antique store.
This is one of his several different
Okay, so that was
jewelry stores. Yeah, this is not his home. This is his business. So it says right here on the side, J. Coleman. This is where he repaired watches, made jewelry, etc. These two are homes. This is a business proper. Yeah, good questions. He also took a photograph of the very first teachers in Massillon. So this is about the 1850 roster of teachers. So if anybody knows Thomas Harvey, who wrote the Harvey Reader, which was much like the McGuffey Reader.
Was Harvey School named after him?
It was, yes. Here we have, this is Sarah Hawksworth. She was a teacher for many, many, many decades. So we have photographs of her later, and you can kind of get into, identifying all of the very first teachers. He also gave us the very, very first overview of Massillon. So based on best guesses of when his photography was going on, when these bridges were built, this is about 1855. Again, looking at all the buildings downtown, I mean, we could go down the road forever.
Is that Main Street?
Main Street. So if we are at basically the Lincoln Way Viaduct looking east, this is the view that you would see. I know it shows up a little bit light on here, but this is the Lincoln Way Bridge that was then replaced in the 1950s as part of the flood control project. Yeah, so not all of these businesses are nicely identified, but some of these warehouses do match up to warehouses along the canal that we know of. I believe this is Central Presbyterian, the very first steeple.
Where do you think he took it from?
Good question, because he does seem kind of high up, right? So possibly if there was a house or a building on the west side of the river shooting down.
Hot air balloon?
Hot air balloon?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
That would be kind of cool. I don't think so, but only because I think that this is one of those daguerreotypes that took a long time because there's nobody on the street. I see no one. There's maybe, there was one horse somewhere down the street that you could kind of see. But it would have taken quite a long time.
Does the bottom of that bridge match up with where the bottom of the present viaduct would be? There?
Good question. I'm not sure. I think that's at the base of the Lincoln Way Viaduct as you're coming into town would have been about there because it got extended and over so that it didn't get flooded out again. Right. So it's a much longer bridge than this would indicate. And it expanded over time. They actually added some steel girders to widen this bridge over time. So when they went to take this bridge down as part of the flood control project, you could see underneath there were steel beams that kind of went into the stone that added lanes onto the bridge.
Could you zoom in again?
Yeah.
Is that a cross or a street sign or just a pole with something behind it?
I know it kind of looks like a street sign. That was always my first thought, but I didn't see any other street signs anywhere. So it could just be like this way to the horseshoe place.
Interesting.
Not sure.
Are there train tracks there?
There are not. And so that's why we're not sure if it's like pre, post. Margie, if you have any insight, please feel free to
John Sparks
chime
always
in.
said that he could tell that this was after 1852 because he saw a railroad track there. But
He saw a railroad track
I
there.
don't know where it is. But he would know railroads.
This is very true. Okay, so there you go.
That's fascinating.
So the sad part is that the original of this does not reside with the Massillon Museum. We have copies that were made in 1926 as part of the centennial. But by the time that Fletcher's daughter, Lillian Fletcher, was ready to donate her parents' materials, she was living in Los Angeles, and she donated all of his materials to either the Smithsonian or the Los Angeles County Museum, and there was no museum here in 1926. So there's nowhere to give it. So luckily she did work with us and then gave us some of the other materials later on, but some of the best stuff like this don't reside here in Massillon. So that is Lillian Fletcher, the daughter. So sadly, Abel Fletcher, because chemicals weren't readily available, you couldn't just Amazon yourself some photochemicals. He was experimenting, trying to come up with better ways to do things, better ways to develop. And sadly, he had some of his chemicals explode in his face, which blinded him, which as a photographer, being blinded would be probably the worst possible thing. So his wife did take over. The daughter, Lillian, described it as her mother had to learn from scratch, that essentially Abel Fletcher was, training his wife and talking through every step of the process. But we then get to see one of the early woman photographers of our country. Oh, I swear there was more than that. So some of these portraits, there we go. Some of these portraits, based on even just the style of dress that they're wearing, is like the 1870s, 1880s with big bustles, with little frilly things, even hoop skirts that are this massive. And when we know this person got married, most of these are more than likely Mary Fletcher's actual photographs. So they are both buried at the Massillon Cemetery. I'm sure you're going to have some lovely people there for your creep and crawl to hopefully portray them. That would be lovely. Any questions on Fletcher before we move on? Okie dokie. So the McClymonds building is one of the most intriguing things downtown. When I refer to it as such, a lot of people don't know what I'm talking about. Many people in the late 1900s know it as the Massillon building, thanks to Bernie Green, who purchased it and kind of renamed it. So this is it today on the corner of the northwest corner of Erie and Lincoln Way. And it is Crackpot's Comedy Club today. And this is how the block started. This is not the very earliest shot, but it's an earlier shot. So there were several of these kind of early block buildings. They had typically a ballroom at the top or a meeting space on the third floor. Second floor was sometimes doctor's offices. And then the first floor was typically some kind of clothing store. So there were about 4 or 5 of these in downtown Massillon. And since I know we can zoom in now, yay! There is the Coons Wallpaper Company. There's a peanut vendor here in a wagon. And you can see that photography still hadn't quite, achieved perfect sports mode, because there are still, things that are blurry as a part of this photograph. So this is, so this would be looking north on Erie Street. And I always love, I want to walk up the stairs and I want to see whose doctor's office that is. It looks very cool. So this is Good Hearts. You can also see some fine details like right here in the front. That is a wrought iron horse tie-up that were actually made here in Massillon. There is one on display at the Massillon Museum in our second floor history gallery. So if you want to see one up close, you may do so. Of course, it's easier to date some photos based on what we can see surrounding. So these are all telegraph wires running here, there, and everywhere. Starting to, I assume, probably gas or possibly early electric lights in the middle. We did not get our first traffic lights until 1925, so it's not quite a traffic light, but it's some kind of light. Yeah.
Am I correct that when you were talking about that metal horse
Mhm.
hookup was made by Taylor Clay?
I believe so. Good question.
I think that's what I understood.
Looks like a better. I'm not quite sure off the top of my head, Carrie, but and there's a different view. So looking just to the left of that building with Goodhart's clothing store. So what my favorite thing is when you know that a building is going to come down because we know the McClymonds building exists. Like the snarky posters that businesses put up talking about how they're going out of business. This is one of my favorites. This building to be wrecked. Pick them out. Going fast. Any old price. Entire stock must be sold within the next 60 days. Prices slashed. They're going to tear down. That means every single piece of everything must be sold at once. Like, it's so dramatic, and I love it so much. So,
Who made those signs? Would they have come from Canton is really kind of my question.
Gotcha. Well, we had the MCA Sign Company was founded in 1904. There's hand painters all the time. There was Merwin was another hand painter of signs. So I'm not sure specifically where they would come from. They don't have any particular style except those going out of business ones on canvas. So. All right, so also then next to this building was kind of a public square as such. There was a nice little kiosk here where you could actually, excuse me, thank you, where you could actually write things in chalk. You could post posters. I'm not sure if there's like a person inside for information or if it's just a board to kind of share community information. And what's always intriguing to me is that all of these buildings have these basements. And that every year when the flood came around in the springtime, like if there were businesses in there, like did they just get wrecked every time and then they just had to rebuild every spring? It's always struck me as something interesting. So here we have our peanut vendor again, and we have the Theatorium. It was a very early movie theater. That was, considered a Nickelodeon. It was 5 cents for you to go in and watch a movie. 1908, 1909, a couple years before that. And then this is, I believe, the Peter Shearer family who ran the theater. And you can see inside, they've just got stools for you to sit on and watch the film being projected on the screen. So.
Can you see what's playing at the Theatorium?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Look at the other side.
Is it? Oh, there you go, Black Hand. Good job. And War Children. Interesting. So if they tore this down in 1908, was the Black Hand, I know they were like responsible for the murder of Franz Ferdinand that started World War I. I'm assuming that they were a well-known gang of...
I think in Europe and then came here
Okay.
with my relatives.
Yes, okay, so a film featuring Rudy Turkle's nefarious ancestors now playing at your local Theatorium. Perfect. You can join us at 7 p.m. for a mere 5 cents. Very uncomfortable stools, bring your own pillow. And popcorn.
You get peanuts down the street.
That's true, yeah, the peanut vendor was parked right out front. It was very convenient. So they did tear down Goodhart's after the massive going out of business sale. And again, these pictures are so great. So when you look then on the side of the Theatorium, there's also a set of stairs that's covered that goes up to the second floor. I'm assuming to a projection booth, maybe to someone living up there, who knows. But then we can see all of these, steel beams going up. We can also kind of peek down the street and we can see where Erie Street Vinyl is today. Art Bomb Tattoos. This, I believe, is the post office now. It was Wagner Garage. All right, so as it starts to grow, it starts to take the shape that we know and love. And then here's, another one of the buildings that was not in the way. It didn't have to come down yet, but it would later. And of course, much in the way that they were having going out of business sale signs, there were coming in soon business signs. So Hamburgers is just to the right. Don't forget that Whitman's is just across the street. I'm assuming some circus poster probably got slapped onto one of these at some point in time. So a lot of really great advertisements across the front. And again, it's kind of cool. You never know like how something gets built. So in this case, we're going floor by floor and putting in the stone, which is pretty awesome. And again, this would have taken a good exposure because here's something crossing the street. We're not sure. It's not a ghost. It's just someone taking a long time to cross the street. So. And there we have it. So it gets completed, and then this is one of the police booths that was downtown for people to come and request help, information. It got replaced by the stainless steel version in the 1950s. And Tommy Matthews has got a sweet groove. I just feel the need to dance when you do that. So we already said 1925 is when we got streetlights. So we know this is after 1925. We've got some cars. Everybody's a little less blurry. So it did, serve the function of being J. Walter McClymonds' bank at first, and would eventually become many different things. 6 stories tall. There's many, many things that would have been inside of this building. I can only imagine how many storefronts there actually are. But here I'm assuming the Red Cross. You've got Hegum, Kirchhoffer's agency. You've got an optometrist. I know Dick Gottschall's, one of his family members had a medical office up on the McClymonds building. And I love the ornate nature of all of the little architectural details. They're just pretty great. Of course, she gets decorated for the centennial in 1926, so festooned with all of the finery. And of course, by then she's got really fancy, we've got a fancy electric signage. I assume that this lights up at night, a nice little American flag. And so Gensimer Brothers, which would eventually go on to build the building that the Massillon Museum is in today, they had a storefront in a couple of different spots. Yeah?
And on an earlier picture of that, did you notice that the building was skinnier on Lincoln Way? There was only 2 sets of windows that faced Lincoln Way.
Ooh, so it got like expanded?
Then the third part was added to it.
That's right. Is that because of the
Right there.
the elevator?
Right there.
Adding the elevator in later?
So it didn't come with an elevator?
The theatorium had a year lease that they wouldn't give up, and so he built that section.
Ah, interesting. Well, that's just a...
John, you can't tell it. You can't tell it was out.
No. That's a weird thing. Why? Okay, all right. So the theatorium stayed open. Cool.
Except the west side is red brick. Yeah, I don't know. He didn't use, probably just cost efficient.
What's outside?
The
All right.
west side was red brick, probably cost efficient.
Oh, okay. So now after this presentation, we're all going to go to this corner and take a look and see where the seam of different buildings is. Thank you, David, for knowing the answer to that.
Is there a vault in there?
Is there a what?
A bank vault in there? There's a bank.
I have not seen a bank vault in the McClymonds building. I've seen one in the Duncan building that's right across from the museum, the very, very tall apartment building that you can see through the window. But I don't know that there is a vault in the McClymonds building. Does anybody know? No? Okay. All right, let's zoom in and let's see if we can find it. So there's 2 sets of windows, so it would have been right here, right? I can see a little slight seam. Okay. Well,
Yeah, that was a German deposit bank. It was Merchants National Bank. Was there a vault?
I was going to say there could have been, but I would assume that it would be gone. But I would have assumed the one in the building across the street would have been gone by now, but it is
I
not.
worked in the Woolworth store when I was a kid.
Did you?
I don't remember seeing a bank vault in there.
Okay. Yeah, so then Woolworth's 5 and Dime goes in. We've got cars parked along the street, on-street parking, ooh. What I think is interesting then over time that they kind of paneled off several of them. I never know why. Like, Is it because the windows are just too bright? Does it let too much heat out? Is it a style thing? Like, ooh, fancy, look at this like walled off non-window thing.
For a
Maybe
while,
they had
the
a stock
Woolworths was
room
in there,
there.
was a retail store, you had the candy, you had the candy counter and the lunch counter and all that. But on this side, it was a shoe hospital.
Oh, okay.
Pair of shoes and leather goods and that kind of stuff. Now, whether they put that in there for that reason or not, I don't know. But there was an elevator that came up into the sidewalk.
A lot of the buildings.
On that side of the building too, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because when I used to work there, we used to steal candy out of the basement. On the elevator, so.
Okay, so Rudy, thief, ancestors or Black Hand, stealing candy from the Woolworths to sneak in. What did you say, Mary Jane?
Maybe they put the wall up because there was some kind of storage behind it and they didn't,
Okay.
didn't want windows in it.
Yeah, so storage, maybe another storefront, kind of sectioning off over time.
Windows in, you know?
Well, because it had windows
Yeah, then
to start.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Over the windows.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then there's this additional part here, which is like its own storefront. So, yeah, just kind of put over top. One of the big things that people remember also that they asked me about, Gray's drugstore. It's right there next door. Several of those buildings down there, none of these are in existence anymore, but we'll get to those. Yeah. So now we're up to a little bit more modern times. Watch my time here. There we go. Gottschall, dentist, right there. So Dick Gottschall remembers sitting up there and watching parades from that second-story window. So it's a pretty lovely time.
Ron Christoph used to have an office up there too. Smoked big cigars and had a spittoon right next to his desk. Smoke and spit at the same time.
I just need you to give me every story that's in your brain. Is that okay?
Is it still up there or not?
I don't think that anything is up there at all. That's kind of one of those things, like, hey, there's all this magical space. So I'm not sure what condition it's in on the second and above, but there's activity obviously on the first floor still happening.
Apartments. I saw a sign, apartments for rent. I don't know that it's still up.
I think that was because he's also the landlord of the apartments on 4th Street. Because I thought I had that same reaction, like, good, did they put apartments up on the top floors? But yeah. So hopefully someday somebody does something nicely with it. I know that when the museum was looking to leave the library and kind of find our own way in the world, this was one of the buildings that was discussed as to whether or not we should take a few floors, but that did not come to fruition. All right, just a couple more, I think. This one's interesting, and I'm not quite sure if there was someone on the top of the building, but there is definitely some hubbub. A lot of these come from the Massillon Independent, so not a lot of them have a lot of great context. They just have the date that they appeared in the paper, and so then you have to match up the article with the negative to know what's happening. So,
It looks like somebody needs to jump out of the window.
right. Which story of window are they jumping from, right? So I'm not sure if it's a fire or somebody was, being sassy. It's a jumper. Also, just look at the cool fire truck. It's a very, it's a very good snapshot in time, right? Okay, anything else on McClymonds building before we move on? Cool. I don't know when Woolworths closed. Does anybody know when Woolworths closed? No, like some of the more recent history. 70s, as we started to move out towards more strip mall kinds.
MAM bus, and Massillon Alliance Mansfield bus in front of the Woolworth store. That would have been in the 70s.
Okay,
I moved to Millette Mall. When I go to Millette Mall.
okay. So moving towards malls, strip malls, storefronts outside of the downtown.
I do remember the Red Cross was there till the late 1970s because I used to volunteer with them. And
Okay.
they were still there.
Excellent, okay. All right, so the Red Cross remained at least until the late 70s. Okay. And I apologize, everything that's post-World War II is not quite in my brain yet. I've got all the early stuff pretty well sunk in, so thank you all for filling in everything that happened after World War II. All right, so the post office building, built in 1913. Originally the post office actually was part of the Warwick block, which is not the same building. But in this like nice little corner here, we've got the post office and our lovely mail carriers. So again, just to show, it's in the bottom right-hand corner of the Warwick block. What was?
Can I ask you one question?
You sure can.
Then I'll shut up. The one before that.
Well, don't shut up. You
Lower
just ask your
left-hand, look
question.
at this on the left edge of the picture,
Right here?
back there.
Canal? The canal?
Yeah, the canal.
That's the canal, but the canal was wider there, if you look at the maps. And the canal was wider to serve the backs of the storefronts on Lincoln Way and everything, so they can load out the back of their stuff right on the canal boats and everything.
Yes, and there were a couple of designated like extra pull-offs, kind of like here, where you could kind of dock at the port of Massillon proper. Yeah, it's listed as the port of Massillon. Yeah, I know, right? And so then it's kind of cool because this is the only picture we have of several of these buildings and the backs of the buildings. The fact that there's like a rickety, weird wooden bridge across the canal there. Yeah, and sometimes they'd have some basement pull-ins, and yep, there's all kinds of amazing stuff associated with the canal. So what I love is that you could get this many people. Like again, where are we taking this photograph from? Because we're pretty far out. So they've even got people kind of hanging out of their windows for the photo. Second and third stories. What I do like is that the museum. The museum has, if you'll see right here, this little lovely block. We actually have that architectural element, which I am hoping to put on display next year. So stay tuned. I don't know why we have random bits and pieces of buildings, but I do love it. All right, so our post office started there in 1907 when there was or maybe 1908, when there was a fire at the livery. Please help me there, Margie. The livery? Bance? No. West Side? Livery? Kramer livery. Sadly, all of the postal carriers' horses were killed in a livery fire. And so the postal carriers had no way to get around the way they needed to. And so the Croxton Keaton company loaned them all Jewel automobiles. So here's the whole force. They have one driver per postal carrier, because of course in 1907, not everyone knew how to drive cars, especially these particular automobiles. So there was a driver and a postal carrier who would be able to take the mail and continue delivering. Pretty cool. So this was the inside of the post office, which I think is just cute. You were talking about spittoons. There's one right there, ready for your tobacco to be spat into. But lovely. We've got some kind of postal boxes back here, and of course some windows for some assistants. But just so cute, right? Don't you just want to visit? I'd love to. So they decided, obviously, they were going to need a bigger place to process and deliver the mail. So they picked a site which is on Federal Avenue, as we know it there today. And correct me if I'm wrong, designed by Albrecht and Wilhelm, yes? Yes, designed by Albrecht and Wilhelm. People call often as they're driving through town, if they don't know the area, to ask if it was some sort of Federal Reserve, because it's Federal Avenue. It looks very official government, but doesn't have any government signs. So I have to explain to them it's the old post office. This is the back side. Lots of really great windows there. There were many, many postal carriers over time at that building. Of course, the gorgeous entryway to the front doors with these big, massive lights, and the back docks as well. And you can see there are postal carts, so that's where the horses really come in to play, to rural delivery out and about beyond just walking the streets of Massillon. And so there was, expansion of P.O. boxes, places to drop letters. Their storeroom and sorting facility obviously had to expand, so this provided some much needed space. And it was a great interior. Again, it's like 3 to 4 times the lobby size as it was before, which is pretty great. And a lot of articles, for some reason, in the Independent talking about, mailing letters and the rush to get your packages in on time. Here's President Eisenhower overlooking the whole scene. And of course, posing when there's new commemorative stamps. But it's cool to see that these windows do this neat rotatey thing. And so as, the post office obviously grew then again beyond that. They did have an annex just up the street. Today this is Tremont Coffee off to the side there. And there is like a garage zone where they had an annex. And then they moved to their current spot today. Yay. All right, any other questions on post office?
That's a pretty grand post office building for a smaller town.
It is, right? So what I think is cool about this is that, again, like at least it's not abandoned. Currently it is taken up by the Rodney G. Klein Stock Market Museum, is also then partially cared for by the Massillon Tiger Booster Club. And so they have some activities in there. So there are people, preserving things inside. And I believe by appointment you can go and have a tour of the Stock Market Museum, which is actually pretty cool. That he collected a lot of really neat things in his time. So, okay. Da, 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 da. Okay. MCA Sign Company, built probably somewhere around 1906. At least Croxton Keaton moved into it in 1906. It was a very, very massive building that was added onto over time. It then grew to kind of expand into several different buildings as, making signage grew years later. But why we're so interested in this building is that the Massillon's Jewel automobile was made in this building. So looking at some of their promotional shots, you can see some of the fire doors that were back there and the conditions under which it was built. There was a wooden elevator that actually took the Jewel from one floor to the next floor for different parts to be attached. And they were advertising their beautiful Jewel automobile for $800. So suddenly affordable magic that you could go through a rural community in this lovely horseless carriage. And so this is where the Jewel automobile was reportedly actually made. So there is a pit down here, and there were some hoisting devices here. They've painted in the windows since then. The building no longer exists, but we did get to tour before they tore it down, which was great. And Margie, I'm sorry, there's going to be a picture of you, so I'm warning you. So the MCA Sign Company was founded in 1904, and they eventually, once the Croxton Keaton Company left to go to Cleveland, they took over this space and obviously expanded operations. We have quite an extensive archive of the MCA Sign Company, so if you're interested, these are all digitized online. And I love looking at all the various machines because I'm so not an industrial person, so I don't know, very interesting machines always intrigue me as to, knowing how to properly run them. And so many, many different operations taking place from, etching to printing plates, making actual signs of vinyl, cardboard, tin, you name it. Some of the examples of their handiwork, which I think Cato Fashions, that sign's still up, so they did great on that. That's right near Target. And people will call from all over the globe because they have various memorabilia that was in fact printed at the MCA Sign Company. And so at the very bottom it will say Massillon, Cleveland, Akron Sign Company, but there's no date. And a lot of times people want to date their materials, which is not quite as easy as it sounds. But we can do a little bit of sleuthing. So in the building, there was shipping and receiving. And when we were invited on site, it just kind of looked like everybody walked away and there was still just stuff. So most of this is all down. A lot of the buildings, kind of on this block have now been taken down as we move into the 21st century, kicking and screaming. So this was marked as the last job on April 17th, 2014. So this was left inside the workshop. So they did invite us, the auctioneers who were put in charge of auctioning the whole building and contents off, did invite us first to come and see what historic items we wanted to save. Yes?
In the early 1950s, they claimed, I'm not saying, they always claimed that was the largest sign company in the world.
Interesting.
Every Coca-Cola, the sign was ever made was made there, Firestone.
I'm impressed. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the largest, because it was massive.
Did you happen to get the big table that was in their advertising display room?
Oh, goodness, no.
It was a big table, and at the end of it, it lifted up, and they had electronic controls down here that they operated for lighting and everything. for
Oh, very
advertising
cool.
displays.
No, that sounds amazing, though. No, we did not take fancy electronic table. We had to keep it to a minimum because there's only so much space in storage, which you're aware of. So, no. We went for what would people actually be interested. So we took this instead. No, I'm kidding. We took pictures of this instead of taking this, yes. So lots of drums and machinery, and the massiveness of this space just cannot be overstated. It was a huge complex. And again, it was a whole, car production company, plus then adding on the sign business. And just every time we took a tour, it was like it would go on for miles and loop back around on itself.
Do you know how many people were employed there?
I am not actually altogether sure.
That'd be interesting.
No, yeah. Carrie.
You probably have enough. I went to that auction and I have a lot of small souvenirs from that auction.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I will keep that in mind. So then we got to go up on the roof. Yep, sorry, Margie, there you go. So Margie and Scott and Christina and I got to go up on the roof and take a sweet look around Massillon and again, document everything. So I got to do a photo shoot in there as well because I wanted to get all the other finer details. There's a whole carpenter shop on the second floor. There was a whole room of just printed materials. There was Monsters, Inc. giant cutouts. I'm very sad I did not obtain one of those. Why did I not? I don't know. In hindsight, that was a poor choice on my part. So that would have been amazing. So then last year, they did start to tear down parts of the building. What seemed to me to be the oldest sections of the property. But again, going through and documenting and making sure that we save the details that we can. So, little bits and pieces. You can see the fire door. You can see where the building was held together or, changed and altered. There's random graffiti that was covered up over time. You can see where the beams go into the other structure and kind of join together with another building. So despite the fact we did not take the big table or the big machines, we at least have photographic evidence of that. So that is...
Any idea what's there now? Because there's a partial foundation on that corner.
I'm not sure what is there now.
It stopped. So I don't know.
Yeah, they didn't tear the whole thing down. They just tore part of it down, which I thought was interesting. Okay, all right, I've got 5 minutes left. Oh. So there's what it looked like when I last took photos. So I have not been back since. Okay, I have 5 minutes, but I think this is totally worth it. So the Russell & Company started in Massillon in the 1840s. It was supposedly just this cute little white factory. No pictures of it that we're aware of, but a nice little rendering in one of their catalogs, which then ballooned into the monstrosity pictured here by the 1900s, probably. Yep, got it. So then there are pictures, at least in the 1890s, the 1860s, that detail it is along the canal. They eventually brought the railroad directly into the factory to make it easier to ship out all of their steam tractors and various farm equipment. And a lot of this stuff does still exist today. So if you're going down South Erie on either side of the street, there are still buildings available. This was called the Castle. This was a part of the building in 1892, which sadly was mostly lost to fire in the late 1800s. So we do have a steam tractor on display at the museum in our kind of back garden section. But they ship these all over to Russia, Alaska. People will call with steam engine questions from all over the world. So in 1899, there was a fire on May 8th where our very first firefighter lost his life, and Christian Botts, who would go on to be the first curator at the Massillon Museum, was injured as a wall fell onto him. So many of the buildings were lost, and they had to rebuild parts of it. So this is Christian Botts here on the bottom left, and I don't know that I grabbed a photograph of Bamberger. I think it's in my notes. I see what you did. Okay. I see. I apologize. My notes are not in the bottom. Russell and Company was amazing in that they documented so much. There's a Charles Hegum journal that literally details everything that happened during the day, how many engines they shipped out, how many men were on site working at the time. I was just interested, like, okay, on the day Titanic sank, like what was happening? And you can go in and you can actually read how many people were on site. We heard that the Titanic sank. We're not really sure what all happened. Like, it just goes through every detail of everything happening. So it's kind of a diary and kind of a business ledger, and it provides a really great resource. So they also went through and photographed every department of workers. So there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs of people who worked there. So as the largest employer by 1900, of Massillonians, this is very important because a lot of people want to see photographs of their relatives and want to see, you know, he was a carpenter. So let's check the wood shop photographs from the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and you can really help people to find who they're looking for. Both posed photos and then in the shop photos, so you can see some of the equipment that they were working with. And again, we have a lovely steam engine that comes seasonally onto the back patio of the museum. So please do come and check that out. And if you get a chance to go to the Dover Steam Show, do, because you get to see some of these in action working, which is pretty fantastic. So one of the buildings that does still exist is this large one right here. And again, the railroad, they brought it right through the factory. I got to tour in 2019 when I believe News Channel 5 was coming down to do a segment. And we were able to, we just kind of wandered in. And there's various businesses that are currently still functioning in this property. And we're like, hey, we're going to go take some pictures. They're like, that's cool. So we did. So it's a magical place of modern structures, but then you can also see, you know, absolute elements of very, very early buildings still intact. But you can also see where some of those buildings have, you know, either come down due to fire or were torn down or changed over time. Again, massive doors, lots of beautiful little hints of the past. And signage that just is there. So call button, nope, just kidding, don't use it. It used to be a call button, probably in the 1950s. There's still just massive, massive doors, still hanging out. And so this was where a lot of the people were employed and where a lot of those steam tractors came from. What I do love is that even in the staff lockers, here we have a photograph of Barbara Stanwyck from the newspaper pasted on the wall, still just hanging out there as of 2019. So some pretty cool stuff. So today, obviously not all of those buildings are there. So there are various companies that have purchased, certain parts of it. But that is that. Okay, I am out of time. So coming soon to another library event near you, things like the streetcar barn. So there you have it. All right, yay. And thank you all for your input. I'm glad that I don't have to know everything amongst the people in this room. I think that we've got it mostly handled. It does, right? So it's on South Erie Street. If you go underneath the railroad bridge, right then, look, this is on your left. And then on your right-hand side is like a Campbell Oil, probably not that anymore, but that was part of the Russell and Company. It's essentially anything you see after you come up underneath that railroad dip, everything you see is Russell. Yeah. Any other questions?
Mandy,
Yes.
not being from Massillon originally,
Mm-hmm.
what has fueled your passion for our town? Well, I'm sure a lot of people are here that are from Massillon. What is it that has just sparked your, your passion for learning about this town?
Well, now you've given away my secret, so thank you. I'm not from here. I don't know. I didn't really have, I grew up in the Glen Oak School District, but I also lived in New Hampshire and Akron, and I don't know. It wasn't like a place that I felt particularly excited about, history-wise. So I don't know. When I started here as an intern in 2004, 20 years ago, 20 years, like over the 20 years, everything that I learned is so intriguing. There's such a wealth of knowledge that's here at the library and the museum, and the availability of being able to go through all of those things and tie together nuggets of history to read about very interesting people who were also not from Massillon. You've got Jacob Coxey, you've got Thomas Roach and James Duncan, who founded the town, couldn't possibly be from here because they made the town. So I guess it doesn't really matter that I'm not from here, but I came here and became part of it. So there's so many interesting people who come to lectures and who want to research are very welcoming and inspiring and have great questions. So I've always wanted to help, and I've always loved history, and I just get to do it on a regular basis.
Oh, we love you.
So, well, I love you too. Thank you. Yeah.
The opening picture is of a home on 4th Street. Have you talked about that home in a previous version of this lecture?
Oh, I have not, no.
Okay.
That's a really good question.
I would love to know that.
Actually, maybe I did. Did I? I don't think I did, because I think it was because I got to go inside. Essentially, this is the Steese Mansion. It's the Charles Steese Mansion from the 1880s, 1890s. 1885, thank you, Margie. Its coolest part is right here, where it still has its little carriage step-off and the tie-up. It was in the 1940s and 50s, Chet Cooper chopped it into 10 different apartments. Because a lot of these large mansions by this point, post-World War II, were just so expensive to heat, cool, maintain. I mean, you've got slate roofs everywhere, not all of them were going to make it. So chopping it into apartments was the answer for him. What I was so thankful for, Jeff Dahl purchased this property, and I believe is probably moving towards something like the Social at the Stone House, where it'll be restored and people can go there. When we went in there, once they pulled all the drywall off and unsectioned off those apartments, everything was still intact. The fireplaces, the tile, the light fixtures, the crown molding and hand-carved everything was still there. So thankfully, this one has a chance at actually being something spectacular again.
If it's not there, some of it's still in the basement.
Now, there are I know of at least 2 light fixtures that have made their way to the Massillon Museum, so we have those, but everything else that was kind of behind a wall is at least there.
It's always interesting, the Women's Museum, or the Women's Society went one way, and this kind of went another way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that because the McClymonds daughters donated the women's club, to the women of Massillon. The fact that there was always activity happening in it, the fact that there was always going to be somebody there to take care of it. The Massillon Heritage Foundation, raises funds to be able to maintain it. So when there's a lot of activity and interest in visiting it, it's one thing. When it's a private residence, it doesn't always happen the way that we want it to. One of the buildings that I always think of too is the C.M. Russell Mansion, which is now a tire store, because it was a same thing, monstrous, massive stone structure. It's after World War II. It's just too much to maintain, and when you sell it off, it could go any which way. So.
The Case Mansion.
Or the Case Mansion in Camden. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, it was just.
Yep. Or across the street, Jack London's mother's childhood home, the Wellman Mansion. They took that out, So I could cry with you for 3 hours if you wanted about the things that we've lost. So I'm going to focus on the things that are still standing and that have hope, just because we have to. We have to maintain what we can and document what we can't. Whatever's coming down, at least take some pictures and not take the big crazy table or printing press. So. Awesome. All right, thank you guys so much. Yay.